So hello, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes, but we're just going to be kind of hanging out. Well, first and foremost, welcome. This is the Beyond Our Value continuing education. We're today going to be going behind the walls. So it's very exciting time for TimberHP because we do have TimberBatt coming out within the next couple of weeks. It's going to be going to our distributor, Cameron Ashley Building Products. Primarily at the beginning, and we'll talk about all the how to purchase the product as well, because I know as we're kind of rounding the corner from getting our production getting going to now actually producing product that's saleable. That's something that we're going to be kind of talking more about, and how to get the product, but also diving into what wood fiber really is in general, if it's your first time on this, or if it's you're continuing. So I would like to say Happy New Year and welcome Bat. So that was a little joke in there. So we are going to be talking a little bit about TimberBatt today. So first and foremost, my name is Dan Edelman. I'm the business development manager. I reside in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So I'm kind of covering the mid-Atlantic and then some. And then I'm going to pass the mic over to Paige Malloy so she could do a quick introduction.
Well, thanks, Dan. So hi, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope everyone's doing well today. I'm Paige Malloy. I am the territory sales manager for TimberHP. I cover New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and then I help Dan as well in the Mid-Atlantic as we really start to dive into our markets. Yeah, I live downstate, hour north of New York City, so I can get
Awesome.
everywhere pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining, Paige. And I
Thanks.
see a lot of familiar faces out there in the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, just kind of talking about bat insulation in general. And I'm going to actually ask Paige, Paige, what are some different bat insulations that are currently on the market? And I'm going to say, there's a lot of smaller, different bats, but the main ones, what are those?
Well, we have fiberglass bats, faced and unfaced. You normally see them either bought in bat or even rolled up and then cut into bat. Then we have different mineral wools on the market, which are, depending on the manufacturer, they all pretty much have the same makeup of the different mineral mix. And then that's really your only options until wood fiber came into the market.
For sure. Yeah. And, when we start talking about bat insulation in general, one of the things that always comes to mind is obviously our value per inch. And we're going to be getting into about 4 per inch, which is very similar to a fiberglass bat or a mineral wool bat as well. The other part is like what it's made out of, and what is like a mineral wool bat typically made out of, Paige?
Some sort of mix of steel slag and basalt stone, usually whipped together, and then the manufacturer can kind of change the composition of those two products mixed with some sort of binder. That's why there's concerns about trace formaldehyde and things like that, just because of the binder that goes into different products.
Yeah, and then on the fiberglass side, it's just glass. So when we start talking about the history, because I'm a big history guru too, for those that don't know that about me, but basically the history of fiberglass and mineral wool pretty much started back in the 1930s and 40s. That was something that a lot of people kind of uh, were needing to insulate their homes. They were always worried about heat. They stopped really heating with wood at that time, so they actually started heating with other sources, which cost money. It's not just go every year cut down a tree in your yard and now you have the heating season. You're heating your home. The other thing to talk about is density, and that's something that really makes a big difference on the install portion, but also on convective looping. So when you start talking about convective looping, having that really tight friction fit in the wall cavity is very important when you talk about that. And the density helps reduce wind washing. So whereas a fiberglass bat's going to end up being anywhere, and again, these are very vague. They differ from manufacturer to manufacturer, but you're looking at basically down at like a 0.5 pounds per cubic foot. And that's basically if you weighed the material itself 1 square by 1 square by 1 square, how much would that actually weigh? So that would be half a pound per cubic foot, all the way up to about a 1.5 density on some of the higher performance fiberglass. Then when you look at mineral wool, you're looking at like a 1.7 pound density up to like a 2.3, 2.4 even. And then when you start looking at wood fiber, we're actually starting at 2.6 and going up to about a 3.2. So that's going to depend on which products you're actually using. And one of the nice things about that added density is A, you have lower wind washing, you have better, you have reduced airflow through that material. And it's also when you start talking acoustics, that's going to actually help a lot with acoustics. The other thing that, not really any of these products have, but how about off-gassing? Like, is that a thing with fiberglass or mineral wool, Page? Or what products do
Mm.
have issues with off-gassing?
I would say that if we're going to talk off gassing, that would relate probably more to chemical compounds like spray foam. There is, I would say, a different smell to different products, right? And that's why there's concerns around different types of binders, low VOC, but I would say mostly the foam products are the off gassing portion of the insulation.
Yeah, and that off-gassing is really just from blowing agents. So as the product ages, it's going to be basically, if you figure, like a foam product is going to have a little bubble. And in that bubble, they have a different gas to increase the R value of that material. But what happens over time is those bubbles could break down, and then that gas gets removed. So that's off-gassing, but then regular air that's all around us fills those gaps, lowering the R value because now you don't have those gases that are in there. Another thing, and I'm going to have Paige talk a little bit more about this, but cutting,
Mhm.
cutting these different materials.
So yeah, there's obviously different ways to work with different products. I know fiberglass has been around for a while, and there's been plenty of cutting tools to use. I found personally that it was difficult to cut appropriately. There's a lot of stretching or tucking around outlet boxes and wires because it's just easier than cutting it. Mineral wool, you know, based on my experience with it, is fairly easy to cut. To be honest, I do see a little bit change in the workability of it, but it really comes down to what knife you're using. It can be a very unforgiving adventure if you don't have the right tools on hand. There's a lot of jokes around the bread knives that are promoted to cut mineral wool. They've worked really, really well, and they are really good bread knives, to be honest. But when it comes down to job site versatility, if you don't have the right cutting tool, it can really affect the overall install and performance of your product. So when you look at wood fiber, the fact that it is made from wood, it gives you a little bit more wiggle room on site because there's a plethora of different cutting tools that can be used to work with wood, right? So a little bit more forgiving in that sense.
Great word, by the way, plethora. I like that, Page.
Thank you. I've
Um,
been working
yeah.
on that.
And then when it comes down to wood fiber, it's a serrated knife, it's the straight edge knives. I have one actually right here, and we'll get into cutting tools in a little bit. And we're going to really dive a little bit more into just wood fiber in general right now, but any serrated knife will cut it. Um, and then we're going to kind of talk about embodied carbon. And this is something that, obviously it's a big part of, I think, our future decisions. It never really was a something that we ever really looked at, and we'll get into how and why. Like wood fiber is actually carbon negative. Fiberglass is very low. As you get kind of move up, you can see the slide. These are all actually from a third party, Sphera third party consultant that we hired. And our numbers I did want to bring up too, because some people will ask for like our LCA. And what we need to do is actually have 1 year of producing that product to actually have our own numbers. There's speculation on our end that we're probably going to be even better than the -9 for would be timber board. Um, and this is something that just from our hydroelectric plant up in Madison, Maine, that's one of the main reasons for that. The product itself, I always say it's just wood. So it's a very benign product. It's clean, consistent. When you start talking our timber fill, which you see the picture on that, we're getting a really clean feedstock. It's going to be very consistent throughout. And that fill is essentially what we're making our bat product out with. Then, one question, and I've been in the insulation industry, as many of you know, for the past 13, 14 years. So one question I get is, wood fiber. Well, there's a lot of things with wood fiber that don't make sense to people. But I think that one thing to remember is that, wood is an abundant resource in North America. The European product that's $1 billion industry in Europe right now, only 24% of their homes are actually built out of wood. Whereas in North America, 99% of all of our single family homes and a lot of multifamily as well is all wood framed. So if anything, it's a treated product that goes between these wood cavities. So it's going to be better with bugs, better with fire, better with mold and mildew than just regular untreated lumber. And it really just makes sense. We'll get more into the applications in a little bit, but basically anything above grade or interior below grade. So nothing that could be in contact with the soil. So everybody knows this is kind of what we're talking about is TimberBatt. Um, one thing to kind of think about is this is already now being pre-ordered. So your lumberyard dealer, your insulation distributor, your contractor can have access to this. We basically are about 2, 3 weeks out from beginning to ship this product. So it's very, very close. And Paige, I'm going to have you just talk about kind of the R values and some of the other features and benefits of TimberBatt.
Okay. And then before I dive into that, I'm just going to touch on a question Jay Ward put in. It's
Okay.
just about the chips and sourcing them, and I think it's a pretty good question. So what happens when the wood chips run out? Will TimberHP have to start cutting logs and shipping them? To be honest, right now, where we are in Maine and the way we source our chips, we have a great abundance of opportunity to buy it from different lumber mills in the area. So that's why cutting down trees on our own is not part of our process in New England. So we're very fortunate to be in the heart of the breadbasket in Maine, or wood basket. I always say bread, but that's kind of why we're not concerned about running out of chips, because there is a great deal of them and probably have built up in greater amounts since more paper mills have been shutting down.
Yeah, and one thing to note too is the 7 paper mills that in the past 10 years have shut down in the state of Maine were actually utilizing 1 million pound or 1 million tons of wood chips annually. Our full capacity is only using 250,000 tons of those wood chips. So there's still plenty of wood chips that, essentially we could be building more factories.
Absolutely. So as we dive more into the TimberBatt itself, I can't explain how excited we all are to release this to the market, because we know that it's exciting, the story's good, but the performance is even better. And it's just what a time, right? Timing is everything. So we're gonna have TimberBatt insulation, wood fiber insulation bat out in the market. It's going to be able to do everything that you're already looking for in insulation. There's going to be thermal values to everything, but there's also going to be a great deal of acoustic contribution. It does very well with sound. Kind of relating on the density you talked about earlier, Dan, it really does come down to that. So what we're going to have out in the market is a product that is versatile. We have wood and steel framing SKUs because we can be used in type 3, 4, 5 construction with non-structural steel studs. We'll have 16 on center, 24 on center. The acoustic bat for interior walls will be 3 inches, like the standard that's out there right now, specifically against what most people use, mineral wool bats for interior walls. And then we will have R14, R22, and there will be an R30. Truth be told, we are committed to excellence in the sense that we will not increase our R30 to 7.5 to get an R30, and we're not going to go below an R4 per inch at all. We don't up, so we want to stay true to that. That's also why we get those nice even numbers for R values instead of odd. The product advantages versus what is out in the market: it is hygroscopic. So it promotes drying in your wall cavity in a way that is not hydrophobic. It actually will do a good job of absorbing any moisture it comes in contact with and then evenly distributing it throughout itself so that it can dry out or perm out of the wall cavity while maintaining its integrity and structure. Won't affect the R value and it's not going to affect how the bat sits in the cavity.
Some may
Uh,
even say hydric buffering and redistribution page.
some may, I think you should, but realistically, what we're getting is a very flexible yet semi-rigid bat. So it is a robust product, but I think the fact that you can bend it and it's not going to tear or rip is going to be much easier use on the job site, because then when you're cutting it or you're doing wire tucks, you don't have to worry about breaking the bat as easily. It's just going to go in easier. So we consider it one of the most durable bats on the market, something we're very proud of. There's no toxins or harmful fibers. It's wood, really. So sawdust, it's everywhere and that's it, and it's okay. It's got a very quick settle rate. So anything that comes off the bat when you're cutting it falls right down. It's very easy to clean up. There's no harmful chemicals that are added. You don't have to worry about things like that and standard irritants. Our PPE recommendation is obviously safety glasses. When you're using sharp knives, be aware of your surroundings. Wear gloves if you need, and maybe a mask if you're installing in a unventilated area. But that's more for comfort than it is, real safety in that sense, in my mind. Um, with our bat, we do get a Class A flame spread because of the boric acid we add in, just like with our wood fiber. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, I think. But that also helps with our mold and mildew resistance and being a pest inhibitor. So I know a lot of concern is around, well, it's wood, won't it burn? And truth be told, it won't. And at the end of the day, Dan, what do we say about what happens when your wall's on fire?
Well, the biggest thing too, when we start looking at room separation, we still hold a 1 hour fire rated wall assembly. So that's really, same kind of application as you would use with fiberglass or mineral wool. So it's going to basically still hit that 1 hour fire rating. And is a great article that actually Randy Williams just produced, northernbuilt.pro is his website, and that's actually his first latest article talking about the borate that we actually use. It's DOT. I'm It's disodium. I'm not going to try to say it, but it is DOT. That's the chemical composition of it, and it's the most benign of all the borates. We also apply it in the wet stage, so it's actually absorbed naturally into the fibers. So when you're blowing it or when you're cutting it, the dust is not actually the borate leaving the product. So it's going to stay on there, and basically you're impregnating that borate into the fiber itself. How about applications page? What kind of applications would you use for TimberBatt?
Um, any application that you're already using insulation in, unless it's below grade and underground. But it's a drop-in replacement for the things that are on the market. We're not really rewriting the script. We're just making it better, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it is affordable, and it's going to go in your wall cavities. It can go between floors, partition walls, and houses. Um, yes, any of those. I mean,
Yeah,
that insulation.
exactly. And then this is just a quick little video on the fire resistance, and you can kind of see what the borate does. So it actually, you're going to see it's never going to carry a flame. It's going to darken in color, just the way any other insulation will. Eventually it will burn through, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of time. It's just like putting a log on a fire. It's not just, it doesn't instantly melt. There's no melting temperature to wood. So there is no melting temperature. That's something that I've been asked quite a few times. If anything, it's just Shoshone. So, you're basically burning wood. It's going to take a while, but that's when we start talking fire assemblies, then, this is our engineering judgment. So we have this available to everybody out there. It's going to be, like I said, the same assembly as a mineral wool or fiberglass. It's like a UL U305 assembly. So, which is just a single wall 1 hour. And we also have a 2 hour fire rated assembly as well. That's just simply adding more drywall. The weak point in this system is the studs. So the studs are actually going to burn quicker than the insulation, giving it that 1 hour. Very exciting. And like what I was talking about with acoustics earlier, the STC rating when using resilient channel as well is actually an STC rating of 50. When you get into 2x6 walls, the STC rating is 53. Most codes in multifamily homes, it's an STC rating of 45. So we're well above that code. The way I kind of think about STC is really how many decibels it cuts from one side of the wall to the other. So if anybody knows sound or anything, the decibel is basically just the measurement of sound. So it's actually how many decibels it cuts from one side of the wall to the other. That airspace is very important. That's where the resilient channel comes in. Or if you didn't want to use the resilient channel, it's not going to be quite as good with the sound, but using our 3-inch acoustic bat as well. And that's still labeled TimberBatt with a similar density.
Dan, we did have another question come in, and to be honest, I think it's a good one because I tend to forget that there is a hemp insulation out in the market. Um,
Hmm.
and that's on me because I just don't come across it as much in my neck of the woods. But somebody is asking if we could compare the advantages or differences between TimberBatt and hemp bat. And
Yeah.
I think that's something important to touch on.
So very, very similar, I'd say. The one thing that I would say is the biggest difference, and if anything, more of a challenge, is cutting the hemp because it is a very, very fibrous product. I don't know exactly how to cut it. And honestly, I'd probably refer to, I think, what Hempcrete, I think, is the company in the
Mhm.
US that does the hemp bats. But yeah, I know that's one of the biggest things. And I don't know how they're treating it for fire or anything else, like even sound. I'm not sure what the actual density is. So that's something that when you start doing more research on that, just look at the density, look at the R value per inch, look how people are cutting it, look at the fire, look at the mold resistance, and also the bugs. That's something that, again, I'm not sure what other materials that they're using in the hemp to gain that. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I can say about that.
Okay, which is honestly, it's something we should probably brush up on, but I think that kind of just shows that maybe the information isn't out there enough yet either. So, while you continue, I will kind of maybe take a look at something and see if we
Okay.
can have it readily available. And then I'm gonna jump into the chat and keep answering some questions, typing now while
Okay.
you get
Sounds
going.
good. Yeah, so next is very exciting for me. Everybody, or not everybody, but many of you know how much I appreciate and enjoy talking about vapor open airtight wall systems, roof systems, all that. But one term that we always hear is houses need to breathe. And really, you don't. Really, the house or the building, the wall assembly needs to be able to dry. So as codes kind of now increase and you're putting or installing like a foam insulation, a continuous R5, let's say, on the exterior, and let's say you're in climate zone 5, that technically in a 2x6 wall, if you ran a woofy analysis, you're going to find that you're going to have days that you actually build up some condensation on the backside of your OSB or plywood. And now it's not going to be able to go anywhere out. It's going to have to dry inward because you essentially put a vapor barrier on the exterior. So whereas with when you're using like a TimberBatt and eventually timber board or other vapor open products, you're going to see that actually that vapor is able to move through that assembly without condensing. Or if it does on those really cold days, it's able to actually absorb into the material itself and then redistribute, like what Paige was saying. Um, and one thing that's really cool is our product TimberBatt can hold up to 15% of its weight in moisture. And again, I'm talking moisture, when you have a dew point, not bulk water. The biggest issue when you have a bulk water leak is the fact that you have a bulk water leak, and you should definitely fix that issue. You're going to have many more issues than just the insulation getting wet. If the insulation does get wet and you're removing it, I do always recommend replacing that insulation. That's with any insulation out there on the market, though. because you don't know what's growing in there, what's living in there, what's going on in that bat. And the cost typically of insulation is very low. Typically, it's less than 1% of your total home construction bill, maybe 2% now that we're starting to increase uh, that insulation package on these houses. So, like I said earlier, hydric buffering and redistribution, very similar process. But that's basically just the ability to absorb moisture. When you start looking at perm ratings, our bat products are going to be basically way up above 50, 60, 70 perms. And then the 1 inch board on the exterior is going to be 40. And we'll be talking more about timber board on a future episode of this. But as we start kind of looking at the codes and everything, we're starting to see a lot more cavity insulation. Even in climate zone 4, 5, 6, you could actually build a 2x8 wall and do an R30 bat. The other option is using timber fill, which is a nice, you could dense pack that product and you could blow it in an attic. So even with the R49 or R60 code in an attic, it's a very easy and very price point conscious option that's very similar to like a cellulose price. Now, grading, insulation installation, and I might be bringing Paige back on here for this, but one thing to note is, how do we put all these pieces together? It is a tight fitting bat, and this actually I pulled from Construction Instruction, so they're a great group of folks out in Denver, Colorado, um, that we work with quite often. So grade 1 is pretty much what you want. It's the picture showing fiberglass. You're going to grade all your insulations the same. So this is pretty much any areas, and I have the other chart on there that's from NAMA, North American Insulation Manufacturers Association. So that's also talking about it, but basically it's less than 2% gaps or anything else. You're not going to really be over compressing the bat. And that's one nice thing about wood fiber. It's really difficult to actually over compress the bat. So it's going to have a flexible edge and flexibility to the bat. But it's really easy to actually kind of fill in there. Then when you kind of start talking about grade 2 installs, this is going to be, I'm sorry, the gaps are actually less than 2% on the grade 2. The grade 1 is less than half an inch, basically minor compression, and there's really no visible sheathing anywhere. So the grade 2, like I was just saying, is less than 2% gaps. And even with that 2%, you're going to reduce your total R value or your effective R value by quite a bit on this. So it's always best to inspect your insulation. And that's one of the nice things about having an unfaced bat. And then that's also a conversation about vapor control, but we're not going to really get into that this month. That's actually our conversation next month. But really, when you start looking at if there is an airspace in between a bat, you effectively just brought in a lot of either cold air or cold climate into the system, or your warm air is actually leaving. That's technically what's going on there. I always like this one, the grade 3. When you look at these websites, they actually say if you notice this, call back your insulation contractor or redo it, because you don't want this kind of install. This is less than 5% total surface of seeing the sheathing, and greater than 10% of the total surface is compressed. So you want it to be completely flush with the front of the studs. And then that kind of brings up cutting tools. And Paige, if you want, can you just kind of run through some of these different cutting tools that are on the screen right now?
I mean, yes. There it goes, zoomed in by accident as I was muting the chat. So I'll be honest with you, some of these tools were completely new to me. The standard, more operating cutting tools. Truth be told, personally, it's much safer for me to just use the saber, just because I'm more comfortable with it. So I'll stick to those mechanically used tools, and I'll let you dive into some of the more aggressive ones, if that's fair. But
Yeah.
as you can see there, we have our new saber that we're releasing out and we've designed. You had a big part in that, I know, Dan. So it almost makes sense for you to really explain why you dove into and worked with to get the different pointed front versus this scallop sized and things like that. Because I don't want to overwhelm what the comment was earlier about the workability of our product. This is just showing some of the different tools you can use. I mean, in Europe, they'll cut it with a chainsaw if they need to, and it works, right?
Yeah.
But even though our cutting tools are designed for easy use, I don't want to say that they're absolutely 100% necessary to do it right, just because
Hmm.
wood fiber is an easier, more forgivable product to work with when you're cutting it.
And one thing also is we really did a lot of fiber morphology when we started creating the products.
Mhm.
And one thing to note too is that we understand that the European market is a much different market for insulation. So if you actually have our product, our actual TimberBatt product versus like a European product, you're going to find ours is going to be a softer material. It's going to be lighter. It's going to be the density is very similar, but it's only like 10% less dense. But it's really about the binder. So it's not going to be nearly as rigid and as difficult to cut as the European products that you might be used to. So, you see like that giant looking saw DeWalt thing that's sitting on the table there. You really are not going to need that. A lot of that is you're not going to need that. I do like the Baco saw. That's going to be still just nice to have for your cuts. And I'm actually just going to kind of go into the next slide because here it kind of shows, the different ones being used. So you have like the jigsaw blade just in a jigsaw. That's going to be just like this scalloped edge on the saber. So I personally like the serration of these different blades because I feel like it's going to get keep it's going to be sharp for longer. Versus a straight edge, which you're going to be sharpening quite a bit, even though that the wood is not going to really, um, make the blade less sharp as quick. You don't have to sharpen it as much. So the serration just makes it a little easier and easier to cut. And I actually have a great video with the saber that's right here. And this is Jason Todd. Paige, can you hear the audio? No? Okay. So you could kind of see this video, how the bat is performing. I want to note that it's not falling apart. We use a polyester fiber, which I think is very helpful when actually, I'll just mute it. Um, we use a polyester fiber that's going to basically use our hydric buffering and redistribution. When we melt that fiber into the bat, it automatically will go into the entire bat. So it holds together really, really nicely, as you can see. And then just the workability of it. And one thing to note too, and I guess technically he should be wearing gloves here because he's using a knife, but not because of the fiber. It's not an irritant at all. So you could work with this all day long and you're not going to be itchy at the end of the day. So you can see that's like for a wire. And then, he really kind of cuts it in very well there. So grade one, install best practices when you start talking about electrical. Um, I always call it like the Pac-Man or the bend and snap. If anybody knows Legally Blonde, watches that movie, but it's a different bend and snap. You're actually just, basically scoring the bat and then you're bending the bat, pushing in the bottom part, and then you're Pac-Manning that wire you're encasing that wire into the bat. When you start talking electrical boxes, and Jason in the last video was cutting it right around there. So you really see how nice and snug that is, which really reduces the airspace. In a 2x6 cavity, you could also still have that material behind the box, which really helps with insulating your electrical outlets, which that's always an area that, yes, you feel air through there if you don't have an airtight shell, but you also can have a lot of thermal bridging through that as well. So that's always a weak point. And then when it comes to plumbing, you could do like a V notch, you could do a square notch like you see here. This is Matt Damon. He's our field technician manager, and he basically goes around on job sites and actually installs. So he's just basically measuring it, cutting it, and then going and encasing that wire or the plumbing. So it's a very easy process, and you can kind of see just the cleanliness of that job site. So it really does just make sense. And then Paige, how about for ceilings and roof? Do we need any of like the tiger teeth or the hold ups or anything like that?
No, because we're friction fit bat, we don't need to be stapled or wired to install. If somebody did want to put up wires just for peace of mind for themselves, they could absolutely do that. It's not going to negatively affect the product, but it's just something you don't need to install. Friction fit holds itself in the wall cavity, even above your head for the duration of its life. Now, most people assume that once the drywall's up, that's really what's holding it, and it's not, because you can leave this exposed in your basement ceiling as well without covering it or attaching anything to secure it.
Hmm. Yeah, and the only area that you might have to put bracing is like in a crawl space where you do, and you're not in a unvent or in a vented crawl space when you have a lot of that humid, moist air that might get actually absorbed into the bat and then it could fall down over time. That's
Right.
where you would want to, and I'd actually vouch for having a conditioned crawl space, um, or a short basement. I know terminology always changes, but I think a lot of the practices that we have now, as long as you're conditioning them for humidity and other factors in conditioned crawl spaces, that's something that I think is just best practice. And keeping your inside, and your outside, having very clear definitions of, even a crawl space or an attic. Is it inside the building envelope or is it outside the building envelope?
Yes, but depends on how you design it, right?
Of course,
But if
yes,
you're going to include it, it should be conditioned. You're right.
yeah. And then for anybody out there, what would you consider this? And Paige, what grade of install would you consider this install with gaps and cracks and compression and
I'll be honest, that's a grade A. That's the goal. That's what you should aim for every time. Grade
oh
one.
oh yeah, spot on. Yeah, and it's very easy to get to these grade ones. You're gonna see everything with an unfaced bat as well. Then Paige, I'm going to have you just kind of roll through the production process. I actually, real quick, I do see a question. How does the weight compare for shipping on barges? It's 2.6 to 3 pounds per cubic foot. So I guess that's kind of how you would figure that. Comparing to I don't know what mineral wool, it's going to be heavier. Fiberglass, it's heavier, but not by much on the mineral wool side. But I guess just figure that like 2.6 to 3 pound density.
So yeah, I'll go through the production process. One of the great things about the different products that we put out is it really is a simple process in going from raw material to then getting the product. Now, obviously, I am not an engineer and I am not in production. So there are obviously little tips and tricks that go into it. But that's really what our lines mostly look like, this little detail right here. So you have your milled lumber and the waste product is the chips, as we discussed earlier. So we buy the chips sticking to agnostic softwoods like pine, fir, spruce. And then once we get them, we steam them, help soften up and open up the fibers a little bit in the chips, and then we grind them together in this giant plate to get this finely ground wood fiber. Um, that's mainly what timber fill is. We just add the boric acid and it's ready to go. When you're looking at the bat product, it is the same application of the boric acid as our fill, but then we take it one step further and we add a small amount, right, of a polyester fiber throughout the bat. And then when it's heated and compressed, it absorbs into and coats the wood fibers in the bat cohesively and evenly throughout the entire product. So that's why it doesn't affect the install when it comes to, I would say, the comfort of install, right? There's no separation from the wood fiber and the co-product we put in it. So then you get this really nice cohesive product in front of you. There is a question that I definitely want to pick Dan's thoughts on this one about what is the effect of the polyester fiber at the end of life? um, if someone wanted to put it in their compost pile or send it to the landfill. And I know we were having some discussions about this the other day, so I figured you could touch on that better than I have because I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would probably want, we could just send the MSDS sheet. We use less than 2%, so it's a
Okay.
very, very small amount. But in terms of landfilling and all that, I I see a lot worse going into landfills than, a polyester fiber. I mean, if anybody from the 70s has thrown away a suit, it's still, again, I don't know about any of the EPA, that kind of thing. I'm sure that you could look that up. I'm sorry for not being able to really answer that well, but that's kind of the advice that I would use. You could, I always say take all your scrap and actually just toss it up in your attic. I think that's, instead of putting it in a landfill, it will decompose though. The whole, the product will when it's sitting outside for a continued period of time. It's a wood product, so that's why, just like you don't want to bury it because it will start decomposing in that
Mhm.
aspect with the ground and the bacteria in the ground and everything else. But bugs aren't going to eat it or anything like that.
Okay. So I would assume then because majority of our products, all of them, are 95% wood or more, right? So
Hmm.
it really shouldn't affect too much as far as like you
Right.
said, landfill or etc.
Yeah. But for me, I always like to say whenever you have scrap, put it through your blowing machine if you're blowing in the attic, or just dump it in the attic or find another use for it, if at all, possible. When you look at this is actually our facility up in Madison, Maine. What's really cool is we actually converted an old paper mill. Uh, this was one of the nicest, the fanciest ones in the state of Maine. It uses hydroelectric power. And this is something that, we're all very proud of the construction process of it. You could kind of see those big giant cyclones. That's essentially like a giant Dyson vacuum cleaner. And that's
Mhm.
where the fiber, after being steamed and shredded, it actually dries out back down to a 6% moisture content. From there, it goes through some refiners and other, digesters and things like that. And then we pretty much just make the fiber from there, or it is fiber, and we're making the bat or the board or the fill. And then this is a question that I'm sure everybody has, how to buy TimberBatt. So we're Pages right now. She's with our national distributor, Cameron Ashley. So they have access to the TimberBatt. They're going to be stocking it in the Northeast, to begin with, at least. But they do have access to it nationwide. Shipping from Maine is the only factor, but that's something that, we'll get to when it comes. But so Cameron Ashley is a distributor. And then tell me a little bit about like the Lumberyard channel page and what we're doing with them.
Okay, so we are going after a target market with the independent lumber yards so that they will be able to stock, bat, and board and fill if they need. And then we have different partners with buying groups and things like that as well. LBM Advantage being a good partner to us. And then we're going to have Cameron Ashley, who's going to stock all of the product as our out of warehouse or two-step distribution partner so that they can get it to the projects needed quicker turnaround, more readily available. From there, we will be able to utilize Cameron Ashley and their extensive network to get this into the hands of some big installers as well. Um, to be honest, there are so many different paths to market that we have the capability of really working with the end user's needs, their requirements. So if you need it, we can get it to you, I guess is like the
Yeah,
big thing, right?
yeah,
No Lowe's and Home Depot for right now. We're just not really focused on that. We'd rather keep it in the independent lumber yards and installers, right?
yeah. I would say if you are a, builder, installation contractor, or architect, just feel free to reach out to myself or Paige, or if you know your local territory manager from Timber HP, reach out to us. We'll get you in contact with Cameron Ashley, and they could also help out with what lumberyard, what contractor, whatever that might be, whatever that looks. But I think that's going to be really helpful in getting the material, but primarily the lumberyard is what we're mostly focused on selling through. We did have a question about when exactly is the TimberBatt product going to be shipped to our distributor. They're using Hancock Lumber, great account up in New Hampshire and Maine. So basically, we're going to be starting to ship this product in 2 to 3 weeks. So I think that's kind of the answer. So especially in Hancock up in the state of Maine, I'd say definitely 2 to 3 weeks. And that's something that they're going to be able to purchase. They could do a pre-order right now, and we're accepting all that. So either we just reach out to myself, and I could set you up with our territory manager up there who could better help you. Bill Ryan, who's up in Manchester, New Hampshire right now. They're getting ready for a really nice kind of event up at Cameron Ashley in Manchester. And then this is just something I wanted to pop up there. This is just pretty much our coverage chart, or whatever you want to call it, our square footage per bag and square footage per pallet chart. So if you want to you can snap a picture of this. I believe this is also on our website with just all the products that we offer. But you can kind of see what we have. The bats are going to be a true 15 inches or 23. Your stud cavity is a 14.5 inch stud cavity, or a 22.5 inch stud cavity. So you have that half-inch compression occurring, really just so you get a nice tight fitting product. We're going to start with the 3 inch. That's an acoustic bat. And then the R14, which is your, and actually I see package weights on there. So you could actually see how much each package weighs. So that's, I think, really helpful there. So then there's a 3.5 inch, R14, the R22. Those are pretty much available for pre-order right now. The R30, that's probably not going to be available until March 1st. Again, we kind of need to hit like that 4.1 per inch to get a true 7.25. We don't want to have a 7.5, or, I know some other manufacturers have like a 6.5 inch R19 bat that once you compress it into a 2x6, it's going to be an R16 or R17. We also have steel stud products available. So that's going to be a true 16 or 24, because you only have like a thin piece of steel right in there. And that's pretty much it on the bat. So I think this is a good slide. And again, we could send you the sheet if needed for this. I just want to kind of open it up. If anybody, you could raise your hand and we could unmute you, or if you want to just type in the chat or the Q&A section, if there are any residual questions, or Paige, if you see any more on your end.
I guess just an update on when we can expect to see bat in the market, as a broad overview, and then I'll follow that up with another point for now. Do you have an overview of deliveries, Dan?
What's that? I'm sorry.
It's okay. Do you have an overview of estimated delivery dates for bat to reach the market?
Yeah, so we're gonna be basically having them in 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So I'd say, by February 1st, we'll be ready to kind of ship that out to the lumber dealers that are out there. And then I see a hand raised. Oh, Jay, did you have a question?
Jay Ward, Ward Lumber, soon to be stocking dealer of TimberHP. Thanks, Dan and Paige, for the webinar. There seems to be lots of interesting questions in the chat that could still be answered. So I'm hoping you're going to go through those before you end.
Yes, I'm pulling them up right now so that Dan and I can open the floor and kind of discuss these. So one of the big things is, will there be an R38 in the works? And then what's the recommendation to achieve the R38 requirement if we don't have that as a bat SKU?
So I think the biggest thing with the R38 is just the thickness of that bat. It would need to be about 9.5 inches. Um, I don't see that being part of our scope within the next year. It could end up being something, but honestly, when you start looking at like timber fill, I think the option and the cost and the price point, when you start needing to go that thick of an R value, it's best probably to do the timber fill. Um, I understand that there's a little bit, you know, you need a blowing machine, you might need to hire an installation contractor for that. Or honestly, like a Ward lumber, you know, they're going to be having a machine that's able to blow that material too.
Absolutely. And then obviously we can double up bats too to achieve different R values. So there are
Yes.
those two different options when you're looking for that type of R value. If it's new construction and it's looking to meet code, which we all should do, we can also use outboard insulation, right, to start reaching higher R value in wall assemblies where a single bat of R38 wouldn't necessarily be needed. So there's a few different ways to go about getting those higher R values. And Dan and myself and the rest of the TimberHP team are more than happy to connect with you on specifics and see if we can't provide the solution as it arises.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at another one that Jay actually asked too. Can you compare the fire rating of Timber HP to the fire rating of mineral wool? So both are actually the same with the ASTM E84 test. Both are a Class A fire rating. So they're going to be very interchangeable between those two. There is no melting temperature, like I kind of alluded to, and fire ratings for the entire wall assembly are going to be the same. So 1 hour or 2 hour fire ratings are going to be the same material. So okay.
All right, and then going back
And the
down.
technical specs are available. They're all on our website. So we have all of our technical specs on there as well. And then the other question that I see is so I've been using rock wool and it can catch on nails or stud edges and shred rip. Is Timber HP less resistant to tearing when installing? And I would say definitely yes. I think the fiber in there, the binder that we use is going to be less brittle, and it's going to, for instance, and this is just, it's not an actual test, but I drove over a corner of a bat getting into the garage after all the snow that we had, and I tried to pull the bat out from underneath my car tire, and it took considerable effort to actually rip the bat. So easy to cut, but tough to rip. What type of blade for a jigsaw? There's actually, yeah, you want to be careful with the serrated, the really tight, like a drywall serration. You want more of a scalloped edge. Um, Very similar to, they do have some, they're actually insulation. If you Google search jigsaw blade insulation, then it typically comes up.
Mhm.
And then what is the fiber made of that's holding it together? Again, I think we answered that with the polyester.
We did. I want to just jump in,
Yep.
and I'm a big fan of calling myself out on things. I made a little boo-boo. I was typing answers to people, and Jay, thank you for pointing out that they weren't coming through, or I wouldn't have noticed. I just sent it to the panelists. I don't think everyone could see it, so I apologize. I'm throwing the answers back into everyone now, so that they're recorded there in the written form as well. So as I do that, um, if you want to keep going, did you?
Oh, okay, yeah. So
Sorry.
another question from Joe. Hey, Joe, how are you? Hope all's well in central Pennsylvania. Hope to see you soon. But good for interior basement foundation walls in a stud cavity? Absolutely yes. As long as you're not having bulk water leaks going through that foundation, and it's a fairly dry basement, you're not going to have any issue. Again, it's mold and mildew resistant. So even if it does get a little damp, it's going to dry out because it's vapor permeable, and it's not going to have any issues whatsoever. Another one that I just saw come in, does timber board provide any racking strength? That would be something that you need to actually, once we're producing that product, we could get you all the load and deflection testing, and that's something that you would need to probably consult an engineer you would need, I'm going to say no, and you're going to need other additional bracing, not just the timber board itself. And then can bats be squished into a narrower cavity, such as 3-inch into a 2-inch cavity? When you're squishing it 1 inch, absolutely not. You're going to be popping out your drywall. It is a highly dense product, so it should really, I'd say, no more than a 1/4 inch. Should it be compressed? And also you're reducing R value when it is. So whenever you can, have a 3.5-inch or 5.5-inch wall cavity that you're putting in. Otherwise, you're going to need to cut it down. Performance chart available for rigid bat product. I'm sure that if you go to GBA, Green Builder Advisor, they probably have a really good one. I'd say, as a manufacturer, we're not going to, because there's so many variables when it comes to different products out there, we're not going to be supplying, just one fiberglass, one mineral wool manufacturer on there to compare. But there are many differences between them, but Green Building Advisor is probably my favorite there. What is the expected ship date for Timberboard? We're pushing for July, hoping that we could commercialize by then and maybe getting some samples out even before that. Oh, I see Paige's answering. So, all right. Well, Paige, thanks for joining, and thank you everybody for joining. It looks like some people are dropping off and it's kind of getting to the end of the hour. So I did want to just bring up, next month, we're actually kind of changing the time and the venue. So we're doing a Beyond Our Value roundtable where we're actually bringing on 3 or 4 different builders and architects from around the country. And we're going to just have a conversation about vapor. And do you need a vapor barrier? Why do you need a vapor barrier? The history of vapor barriers. And then getting into some building science investigations, whether it's air or it's vapor damage on that wall assembly. So we're going to actually have some remodeling contractors that have seen some of those issues out there. And we're going to all decide whether it was air or vapor. All right.
If
Well,
anyone's looking to get an update on orders or when to order or how soon for their projects, what channel do we recommend them going through besides just us as well?
you want to field that one, Paige?
I guess you could reach out to your local lumberyards and have them reach out to Cameron Ashley or even our inside sales department. You can reach out sales@timberhp.com and see if you can get some exact dates as the POs come in.
Yeah. And if there are any other questions or anything, you can kind of see, actually, if you want, you could follow myself or Paige on Instagram. Our email address is basically first name, period, last name @timberhp.com. And I think that's pretty much a wrap. So thank you all for joining. And next month, we'll basically see you at 4 p.m. and have a nice little discussion about vapor. All right.
Mhm.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.